I knew something was wrong the moment my brother-in-law insisted we all gather in the living room. Phones off, doors shut, smiles forced. He stood near the fireplace like a man about to announce good news, but his eyes were sharp, restless, calculating. The kind of look people get when they believe they've already won. "This won't take long," he said. "I just want the truth out in the open." My sister tightened her grip on her mug. My husband shifted beside me. Our parents exchanged uneasy glances. No one noticed the small camera angled toward the couch. No one realized the trap had already been set. He wanted to expose me. What he didn't account for was who the truth would actually destroy. When the recording started playing and the room began to understand what they were watching, silence fell so hard it felt physical. By the time it ended, no one could look at him the same way again. And he knew it. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon, slipped between a grocery reminder and a missed call from my sister. Family meeting. Sunday. Everyone needs to be there. No emojis. No explanation. Just a period at the end that felt deliberate, final, like a gavel strike. It was from Daniel, my brother-in-law, the man who smiled too much at holidays, who remembered everyone's drink order but never forgot a slight. The man who had married my younger sister Mira 5 years ago and spent every year since quietly reorganizing the family around himself. I stared at the screen longer than necessary. Daniel didn't call for family meetings. He orchestrated them. "What do you think it's about?" my husband Aaron asked that night, scrolling on his phone as if the tension hadn't already seeped into the room. "I don't know," I said. That was a lie, but telling the truth would have given shape to a fear I didn't yet want to hold. Somewhere in the back of my mind, something shifted. A memory surfaced, Daniel watching too closely the last time we'd visited, asking questions that felt casual but landed too precisely. The way his gaze lingered a fraction longer than comfort allowed. Traps aren't announced, but they are prepared. Sunday arrived heavy with humidity and unease. My parents' house looked exactly as it always had. White siding, the old oak tree leaning slightly to the left, wind chimes clicking softly on the porch. Safety disguised as familiarity. Inside, the air smelled like roast chicken and lemon cleaner. Mira stood in the kitchen, arranging appetizers with more care than necessary. Her smile was tight when she hugged me. "Daniel wanted everything perfect," she said quietly. I searched her face. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated. He just said it was important. That hesitation was new. The living room filled slowly. My parents took their usual seats. My uncle hovered by the window. Aaron sat beside me on the couch, his knee brushing mine, grounding. Then Daniel entered. He didn't sit right away. Instead, he closed the curtains, one by one, dimming the room into an artificial evening. He crossed to the entertainment console and adjusted something on the TV, his movements precise. "Before we start," he said casually, "I want phones off. This is family." My stomach dropped. Aaron glanced at me. I shook my head slightly. "Not yet." Everyone complied. Even my father, who hated being told what to do in his own house. Daniel turned. "I think it's time we stop pretending," he said, folding his hands together. "There have been lies." Myra's breath hitched. My mother frowned. "Daniel, what is this about?" He smiled, practiced and calm. "You'll see." He pressed play. The screen flickered to life. At first, it was dark and grainy. Then an image resolved, a living room. My living room. The angle was wrong. Too high. Too far back. My chest tightened. On the screen, I appeared sitting on my couch talking to someone off camera. My voice was muffled, the audio distorted. The timestamp read 3 weeks ago. "That's," my father began. Daniel raised a finger. "Just watch." The video continued. The unseen person spoke. Male, unfamiliar. The audio crackled, certain words almost inaudible, others painfully clear. "Can't believe you haven't told him yet. This has been going on longer than you admit." My heart hammered. My breathing went tight. Aaron stiffened beside me. "What is this?" my mother whispered. On screen, he said something, but the sound jumped, cut, resumed halfway through a sentence. "Not supposed to find out like this." Then the video ended. The silence afterward was ferocious. Daniel turned slowly to face us, eyes bright with something close to satisfaction. "I found that hidden camera," he said evenly. because I had reason to believe something inappropriate was happening. Mira stared at him. You recorded my sister? For the truth, he replied. People who aren't hiding things shouldn't be afraid of evidence. My father stood up. That's illegal. Daniel waved him off. Let's not derail. Aaron's voice was tight. You're implying my wife is cheating. Daniel met his gaze. I'm presenting proof. My vision blurred, not from tears, but rage. That video is edited, I said calmly. Daniel smiled wider. That's a convenient claim. Mira, I said, turning to my sister. Listen to me. She wouldn't look at me. What you just showed, I continued, forcing steadiness, is a manipulated clip taken out of context. You don't know who I was talking to. You don't know. Oh, I do, Daniel interrupted. And that's the part you'll love. He reached for the remote again. This, he said, is the full version. He pressed play. The image restarted, but this time, something was different. The angle shifted. The sound clarified. And suddenly I recognized it clearly. The person off camera spoke. As your lawyer, I'm advising you not to confront him yet. The room stilled. On screen, me sighed. I know. I just needed to hear someone say it. The lawyer continued. If Daniel follows through with what you suspect, timing matters. My mother gasped. The video played on, clearer now, uninterrupted. The conversation unfolded, unfiltered. Me discussing concerns. Me speaking about Daniel's control over Myra's finances. Me worried he was moving assets. Me asking how to protect my sister legally. Daniel's smile faltered just slightly. On screen, me finished quietly. She deserves to know the truth. I just don't want him to hurt her. The video ended. No one spoke. Mira turned slowly toward her husband. What is this? She whispered. Daniel's mouth opened. Closed. You told me, she said, voice trembling, that I imagined things. He swallowed. Mira, that you handled our money because I was too emotional. My father sat down heavily. Aaron looked at me with dawning understanding, not anger. Relief. Mira took a step back from Daniel. You set a trap, she said. For her. Daniel's voice sharpened. You don't understand. No, my mother said quietly. You don't. Daniel looked around the room, searching for support, and finding none. The trap had been set, but not for me, and the family was just beginning to realize what they'd witnessed. No one in the Delgado family ever spoke directly about Daniel's ambition. It existed like humidity, always present, invisible until it became unbearable. From the outside, Daniel appeared harmless, polite, reliable, the type of man who never raised his voice and always volunteered to help clean up after Sunday dinners. He married my sister-in-law, Claire, when she was just 23, still soft around the edges, still trusting the way people are before life teaches them caution. Daniel was 10 years older, established, confident. He worked in finance, a vague enough description that no one asked too many questions. But ambition leaves fingerprints. I noticed them first at a family barbecue 2 summers ago. We were standing near the grill, smoke rising lazy and thick, while my husband Mark joked about expanding the family's small logistics company, maybe a second warehouse, maybe bringing in outside investors. Daniel smiled too quickly. That's risky, he said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. Growth like that can backfire. You don't want to lose what your father built. It sounded like concern. It felt like something else. After that, I began paying attention. Daniel asked questions, always framed as innocent curiosity. He wanted to know how the company's accounts were structured, who had signing authority, whether contracts were centralized or handled independently. He listened more than he spoke, storing information the way some people store weapons. Mark waved it off when I mentioned it later. You're overthinking, he said. Daniel just likes to understand how things work. But Mark had always seen the best in people. It was one of the reasons I loved him, and one of the reasons Daniel underestimated me. The first crack appeared the night of the anniversary dinner. It was a formal affair at the country club. White linen, crystal glasses, expensive wine. Daniel insisted on ordering for the table. Halfway through dessert, Daniel raised his glass. I'd like to propose a toast, he said, to family and to transparency. The word landed with just enough weight to make the room still. There's something I think we should all address, Daniel continued smoothly, especially since money and trust are involved. My stomach tightened. He turned toward Mark. You've been handling a large portion of the company's finances alone. Don't you think that puts everyone at risk? Mark blinked. What are you talking about? Daniel reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder. Inside were printed spreadsheets, documents I recognized instantly. Early drafts, incomplete projections, internal emails taken wildly out of context. A trap, I realized. Carefully baited. These figures show irregular transfers, Daniel said calmly. Unreported expenses, risky allocations. Any auditor would raise serious concerns. Murmurs rippled through the table. Mark's face drained of color. Those are preliminary numbers. They're not finalized. Then why are they being sent to private accounts? Daniel asked softly. Every eye turned toward us. I felt heat rise in my chest, not panic but fury, because I knew those accounts. They were holding accounts. Temporary, legal. And the only reason Daniel had access to those documents was because someone had given them to him. Claire sat rigid beside him, her knuckles white around her napkin. That was when I understood something chilling. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't even about money. Daniel wasn't attacking the company. He was attacking Mark. The dinner ended in chaos. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. Daniel remained calm the entire time. Open hands, measured phrases, the very image of reason. By midnight, Mark was furious, humiliated, and shaken. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from relatives asking questions they shouldn't even know how to ask. How did Daniel get those files? I asked quietly once we were home. Mark sank onto the couch. I sent some forecasts to Claire a while ago. She said Daniel wanted to help streamline operations. I closed my eyes. The trap hadn't been laid overnight. It had been months in the making. The next morning, the consequences arrived faster than I expected. Mark's father, Miguel, called an emergency family meeting. He was old school, deeply private, and allergic to scandal. Daniel knew that. He had chosen his moment perfectly. We gathered in the boardroom, same one Miguel had built with his own hands decades ago. The air smelled like coffee and tension. Daniel spoke first. I hate that it's come to this, he said. But for the sake of the company, I think we need an independent investigation. Miguel's jaw tightened. An investigation? Mark snapped. Based on half-baked spreadsheets. Daniel shrugged. If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear. Classic. I watched Miguel closely. His silence was dangerous. Not indecision, but calculation. Leave us, Miguel finally said. Daniel, Claire, all of you. When the door closed, Miguel turned to Mark. Is there anything you haven't told me? Mark answered honestly. I backed him point by point, explaining the accounts, the projections, the timelines. Miguel listened, nodded, asked sharp, specific questions. When we finished, he exhaled slowly. I believed him, he said quietly. For half an hour, I believed Daniel. That scared me more than the accusations. But, Miguel continued, he underestimated something. He looked at me. You. That was the first time anyone said it out loud. Over the next week, Daniel pressed harder. He called distant relatives. He hinted at legal exposure. He spoke to a consultant without authorization. Every move was designed to isolate Mark and force Miguel's hand. What Daniel didn't know was that I had already started documenting everything. Emails, timestamps, version histories, access logs, and something else, something no one expected. Daniel hadn't just taken information. He'd altered it. A single decimal shift. A renamed ledger. Subtle, deliberate changes meant to exaggerate risk. The kind of mistake only someone trying to manufacture guilt would make. I found it at 2:17 a.m., hunched over my laptop, heart pounding. The trap wasn't just meant to embarrass us. It was meant to remove Mark entirely. And once I saw that, I knew one thing for sure. Daniel wasn't nearly as careful as he thought. The most dangerous lies aren't loud. They're methodical. Once I understood that Daniel wasn't improvising, that everything he did followed a deliberate pattern, I stopped reacting and started tracing. Traps only work when you panic. Patterns collapse when you stay quiet. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn Mark. I didn't even tell Claire what I had started to see, because denial is contagious and Daniel had spent years cultivating it in her. Instead, I documented. Every email Daniel sent went into a separate folder. Every helpful spreadsheet he shared was saved, version backed up twice. I compared metadata timestamps, author fields, and edit histories the way a prosecutor prepares for trial, assuming the person on the other side was guilty long before they were proven so. And slowly, unmistakably, the truth surfaced. Daniel always edited files after midnight, always from the same IP address, always just minor changes, small enough to escape notice, large enough to distort meaning. One extra zero, a shifted decimal, a miscategorized expense. To the untrained eye, it looked like reckless accounting. To me, it looked intentional. I showed Mark the first clean comparison at 3 in the morning. He stared at the screen in silence, color draining from his face. "You changed this?" he finally asked. "Yes," I said, "and not once." Repeatedly. Mark swallowed. "Why?" I didn't answer immediately, because the answer wasn't comfortable. "He needs plausible cause," I finally said. "Enough to force your father's hand. Enough to remove you quietly." Mark leaned back, running his hands through his hair. "Claire would never go along with that," he said weakly. "She already is," I replied, without realizing it. That was the most painful truth of all. Claire had always trusted Daniel's competence more than her own instincts. He spoke with certainty, managed numbers with ease, controlled the narrative so smoothly that she mistook dominance for stability. Over time, he'd isolated her. He discouraged her from working, handled the boring stuff, reminded her she was emotional when she questioned him. By the time the family dinner exploded, she had already learned to doubt herself, which meant Daniel didn't need her consent. He just needed her silence. And silence had been cultivated carefully. Miguel called Daniel in for a private conversation 2 days later. I knew because Daniel walked into our house that night furious. Not explosive, but tightly wounded, the kind of anger that hides behind smiles and clenched teeth. "Miguel is asking questions," he said, pouring himself water without asking. "Very technical ones." Mark said nothing. Daniel's eyes flicked to me. "You wouldn't happen to know why." I met his gaze evenly. "Should I?" For just a moment, something dark passed behind his eyes. "I don't like being investigated," he said, "especially by my own family." "You shouldn't fabricate reasons to be," I replied. Silence fell like a blade between us. Daniel straightened his jacket. "Be careful," he said. "People who dig too deep usually regret it." I watched him leave. Then I locked every door. That night, I took the next step. I contacted an external forensic accountant recommended quietly by one of Miguel's former partners, a man whose reputation rested on discretion and accuracy, not loyalty. I did not explain the family dynamics. I sent him files and asked a single question. Had these records been manipulated intentionally? He called me back 2 days later. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "And whoever did this wasn't sloppy. They were confident they wouldn't be challenged." That was the moment the fear drained away. Confidence doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from entitlement. Daniel believed the family would never turn on him. That belief would be his undoing. Miguel requested a formal meeting the following Sunday. This time, it wasn't casual. The boardroom was prepared, documents organized, lawyers present, but silent. Daniel arrived late. Late was a power move. "I trust this will be brief," he said, sitting without invitation. Miguel gestured calmly. "It will." I placed the first document on the table and slid it forward. Daniel glanced at it dismissively, then frowned, then looked back at Miguel. "What is this?" "A comparison," Miguel said. "Original records versus edited versions. Edits traced to your login credentials." Daniel laughed once. Too quickly. "This is absurd. Anyone could fabricate." I tapped the second document. "Timestamps," I said. "IP addresses. Location verification. Device fingerprints." The room felt smaller. Daniel's smile thinned. Miguel leaned forward. "You used my family's company as leverage. You attempted to compromise its integrity to discredit my son." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Careful," he said quietly. "You're accusing me of fraud." Miguel nodded. "Yes." For the first time since I'd known him, Daniel lost composure. "You don't understand how close this family came to losing everything," Daniel snapped. "I was protecting it." Mark finally spoke. "No," he said. You were positioning yourself to take control once I was removed. Silence hit hard. Claire looked between them in disbelief. Daniel, she whispered, is this true? Daniel turned to her, softening instantly. You know me, he said. You know I'd never. I placed the final document on the table. An email. Drafted. Never sent. But auto-saved. Subject. Transition Authority Draft. Once Miguel approves interim leadership, Mark can be forced to resign under fiduciary concern. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Daniel froze. And in that stillness, everything he had built collapsed. Miguel stood slowly. You are done here, he said. Legally, personally, morally. Daniel rose too. You're making a mistake. Miguel smiled then, small, deadly calm. No, he said. You did. Daniel left without another word. Claire didn't follow. She stayed seated, trembling. And for the first time, she wasn't unsure. She was furious. That night, Daniel texted me only once. You think you won. You don't understand what you started. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because the trap he set for us had finally closed around him, and he was just beginning to realize it. Truth does not arrive gently when it has been delayed too long. It enters like a structural failure, sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. Claire did not cry that night. That surprised everyone. She sat at the dining table long after Daniel left, arms crossed around herself, eyes fixed on the wood grain as though it were the only solid thing left in her world. My mother hovered nearby with practiced concern, unsure whether to comfort or stay silent. Miguel said nothing. He understood that moments like this required space, not noise. It was Mark who finally spoke. I should have seen it earlier, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Claire exhaled, a slow, uneven breath. No, she said finally. I should have listened earlier. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it had changed. Not broken, hardened. I thought I was being loyal, she went on. I thought trusting him made me a good wife. She looked up at me then, but all I did was doubt myself. The room held its breath. I sat across from her, careful not to rush this moment. Revelation is delicate. Push too early and it shatters. He trained you to doubt yourself, I said. That wasn't loyalty. That was conditioning. Claire nodded once. I see that now. Miguel cleared his throat. Daniel has been asked not to return, he said, to the business, to family functions. Effective immediately. No one argued. No one defended him. That, more than anything, confirmed his loss of control. The following days were quieter, but heavier. Word traveled fast in the extended family. Not dramatic gossip, but careful clarification. Miguel did not exaggerate. He did not smear. He presented documented facts and allowed people to draw conclusions. And they did. It amazed me how quickly confidence evaporates when context appears. People who once laughed at Daniel's jokes now spoke his name with caution. Invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. Respect is fragile when built on performance. Claire stayed with our parents that week. She barely slept. When she did, she woke with clenched fists and shallow breaths, caught halfway between disbelief and anger. Years of emotional erosion don't disappear just because the source is removed. One night, she came into the kitchen where I was making tea. I keep replaying conversations, she said suddenly. The small ones. The ones where I felt off, but told myself I was overthinking. I handed her a mug. That's normal, I said. Your brain is reclaiming itself. She laughed, a short, humorless sound. He always said you were manipulative, she said. Said you liked control. I didn't react. I waited. Claire swallowed. I see now that what he really feared was that you noticed things. I met her gaze. I never wanted to be right, I said. I wanted you safe. That was when she cried. Not sobs, not drama, just quiet tears released after years of containment. Daniel did not disappear quietly. Men like him never do. Within a week, Miguel's lawyer received a legally aggressive letter threatening defamation claims and retaliation for professional sabotage. It named Mark. It named me. Miguel smiled when he read it. He's panicking, he said. Good. Daniel also attempted something subtler. He called my parents late one night. My intentions were misunderstood, he told them. Everything I did was to protect Claire. My mother listened politely. Then she said something I will never forget. Protection does not require deception. She hung up. That was the moment Daniel lost his last allies. The formal internal audit concluded 2 weeks later. The findings were blunt: intentional manipulation of records, unauthorized access, clear attempts to create instability. Miguel filed quietly, not out of anger but obligation. The company would not absorb Daniel's ambition without consequence. When Daniel was formally removed from any advisory capacity and barred from accessing further documentation, he finally showed up in person. Unannounced, he waited in the parking lot. I was leaving the building when he stepped forward. "You destroyed my life," he said. I looked at him fully for the first time since the living room incident. "No," I replied. "You overreached." His expression twisted. "You think you're righteous?" "I think you mistook silence for ignorance," I said. He leaned closer. "You think this is over?" I didn't step back. "No," I said calmly. "I think this is accountability." For a second, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Then he turned and walked away, not defeated, but exposed. That night, Miguel called a final family meeting. This time, there were no surprises. "I want this cleared," he said, fully, "so none of you live questioning what you saw." He looked at Claire. "You were targeted because your trust made him access possible," he said gently. "That is not failure. That is humanity." Then he looked at me. "And you," he said, "saw what others could not, and chose patience over urgency." His voice softened. "That saved us." I felt something settle in my chest. Not pride, resolution. Later, as people stood to leave, Claire lingered. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, "but I know I can't go back." "You won't," I said. "People like Daniel only survive where doubt exists." She nodded. "Thank you," she said, "for staying quiet long enough to be heard." That night, I replayed Daniel's text from weeks earlier. "You don't understand what you started." I deleted it, because what I had started wasn't conflict. It was clarity, and clarity, once established, does not reverse. Daniel did not accept exile quietly. Control had been the axis of his life for so long that losing it felt, to him, like erasure. And men who confuse dominance with identity rarely retreat. They pivot. The first sign came as a whisper. Miguel's assistant received a call from an unfamiliar number asking for confirmation of tax filings from 3 years back. The phrasing was casual, curious, nothing overtly hostile. But the timing was wrong, and the questions were too precise. "That's not random," Miguel said when he told us. "He's fishing." Within days, more lines appeared in the water. A banker called about concerns raised regarding liquidity. A distant cousin asked whether the company was restructuring due to recent instability. An anonymous tip was submitted to a regulatory office requesting a review of internal controls. Daniel had stopped trying to win the family. Now he was trying to destabilize the ground beneath us. "He's creating noise," Mark said, pacing the study late one night. "If he can't regain control, he wants to prove no one else deserves it." Miguel sat calmly at his desk, reviewing documents as if this were routine. In many ways, it was. "Noise only works when systems are fragile," he said. "We are not." But I knew better than to underestimate resentment weaponized by intelligence. Daniel knew the family's weak spots, not structurally, but psychologically. He knew who feared scrutiny, who hated embarrassment, who would panic under pressure, and he knew how to exploit that. The email arrived on a Thursday morning. From AJ Consulting. Subject: Notice of Preliminary Review. It claimed to be an external risk firm contracted by an unnamed party to evaluate governance irregularities. The language was deliberately vague, enough to unnerve without committing to accusation. Miguel read it once, then handed it to me. "This is bluff," he said, "but it's an educated one." I opened the metadata. The document had been created less than an hour earlier. The consulting firm existed, barely. A shell. 2 employees, newly registered. "Daniel," I said. Miguel nodded. "Of course." But rather than respond, he surprised everyone. "We will cooperate fully," he said. "With everything." Mark stared at him. "You want to invite scrutiny?" Miguel smiled faintly. "I want to exhaust him." We responded formally and publicly. An open letter to shareholders and partners outlining upcoming voluntary audits, transparency initiatives, governance enhancements, no defensiveness, no counter-accusations, just calm, methodical openness. Daniel hadn't anticipated that. His strategy relied on fear, on the family scrambling to protect itself, to close ranks to hide. Instead, we opened every door. And suddenly, his narrative had nowhere to go. Claire watched all of this from the margins. She had moved out permanently by then. Small apartment, quiet neighborhood, no rush to define the future. One evening, she called me sounding shaken. "He contacted me," she said. My chest tightened. "What did he say?" "He apologized," she said flatly. "Said he'd lost perspective. Blamed stress. Said he missed me." I exhaled slowly. And then he asked if I'd be willing to say you overreacted," she said. "Just casually, in public." That landed hard. "He wants you to destabilize us from the inside," I said. "To introduce doubt." I told him no, Claire said quickly. I needed you to know. I'm glad you trusted yourself." There was a pause. "I don't know how I ever trusted him," she said quietly. "You didn't," I replied. "You trusted the version of yourself he reflected back to you." She was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "He sounds desperate." He was. And desperation makes mistakes. The next move was his boldest and his worst. Daniel filed a civil complaint. Not for reinstatement. For defamation. Against Miguel. Against Mark. Against me. The claim alleged coordinated efforts to maliciously undermine his professional reputation, citing internal emails, cherry-picked, out of context, stripped of timelines. When the lawyer read it, she didn't look alarmed. She looked amused. "He's overplaying," she said. "This won't survive discovery." Miguel nodded. "Proceed." Daniel had forced escalation. And escalation meant evidence. A lot of it. The deposition phase dismantled him. Under oath, Daniel struggled to maintain consistency. His answers looped, contradicted earlier statements. He minimized edits he'd bragged about before. Claimed ignorance where logs showed intent. Then came the question he didn't expect. "Mr. Delgado," the opposing counsel asked, "did you install surveillance equipment in a private residence not owned by you?" Daniel froze. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "A hidden camera," the lawyer said evenly. "In your sister-in-law's living room." Silence. The room seemed to tilt. "That is a criminal matter," his attorney said sharply. "Yes," the lawyer replied, "and it is being considered as such." Daniel's lawsuit collapsed before the week ended. Withdrawn, quietly settled. No apology, just retreat. But the damage to him was complete. Because in trying to destroy us, he had revealed who he really was. The family gathered one last time, this time without tension, without expectation of crisis. Miguel stood, steady and tired. "This ends here," he said. "No more whispering. No more anticipation. We move forward." He looked at me. "You understand what power actually is," he said. "Not because you wielded it, but because you refused to panic when it was threatened." I nodded. Power that needs defense too quickly is usually borrowed. He smiled at that. Later that night, as I cleaned old messages from my phone, I found Daniel's first text, the one from before everything unraveled. "Just want what's best for the family." I deleted it because I finally understood something critical. Traps aren't just set with cameras and files. They're set with assumptions. And Daniel's greatest assumption, that we would fear exposure more than manipulation, had cost him everything. Daniel's disappearance from our daily lives did not feel sudden. It felt surgical. No shouting, no dramatic exits. Just an absence that grew larger the longer it lingered. His name fading from conversations, his presence erased from calendars, his authority evaporating without resistance. For a man who thrived on being indispensable, it was a kind of psychological suffocation. And suffocation makes people reckless. The first reckless act came 3 weeks after the lawsuit collapsed. Miguel's lawyer received an email from an anonymous sender claiming to possess proof of internal corruption within the family business. Attached was a zip file of financial records, some accurate, others grotesquely altered. The message ended with a single sentence. You should have listened when Daniel tried to warn you. Miguel forwarded it to me without comment. I didn't even need to open the metadata this time. The edits are sloppy, I said after 10 minutes. Different formatting styles. Inconsistent currency rounding. Whoever did this rushed. Miguel nodded. He's spiraling. The problem wasn't the quality. It was intent. Anonymous accusations trigger mandatory procedures. Regulators don't need evidence to start asking questions. Only suspicion. Daniel knew that. He was throwing sand into the gears, hoping something would jam badly enough to stall us. It won't work, Mark said, trying to sound sure. But I saw the strain in his shoulders. Because even false accusations leave residue. Claire felt it too. She came by one afternoon, visibly shaken, holding her phone like it might bite her. "You're one of my friends," she said. "Old ones. College friends." Told them I was being manipulated, that I was confused and needed help. My jaw tightened. "He's rewriting your reality," I said. She nodded. One of them asked if I was safe. "Not from him, from you." That was when I realized Daniel had shifted strategies again. This was no longer about power or reputation. This was about isolation. The most effective traps convince the victim they are alone. Claire didn't retreat. She did something Daniel never anticipated. She documented everything. Names, dates, messages, calls. "I was blind before," she told me quietly. "I won't be again." Watching her reclaim her agency felt like witnessing steel cure under pressure. Daniel had used her proximity to build influence. Now, that same proximity was turning against him. The breaking point came with the hearing. The regulatory board had scheduled a preliminary review, not because they believed the accusations, but because protocol demanded it. Miguel insisted we attend in person, fully prepared. Daniel did not attend. Instead, he sent a representative, a junior attorney barely out of school, sweating through his suit, visibly unprepared for the records we presented. The board asked one question after another. Each time, our answers were precise, documented, cross-referenced, verified. Finally, one of the reviewers leaned back and said, "We see no basis for systemic concern." The case was closed that same day. I felt a release, but not relief, because Daniel wasn't finished until he decided he was. And he still hadn't decided. The last escalation was the most personal. It began with a voicemail. Claire forwarded it without listening. "I can't," she said. "I just can't hear his voice right now." I listened. Daniel sounded tired. Not angry. Not manipulative. Just undone. "You took everything from me," he said. "You all turned your backs. I was only trying to protect what mattered." He paused, breath uneven. "I made mistakes. But don't pretend you're innocent." That was his final narrative, shared guilt. If he couldn't control the truth, he would muddy it. I deleted the voicemail. Because guilt only works when it's earned. 2 days later, Miguel received confirmation. Daniel had resigned from his position at the consulting firm he joined after leaving our orbit. No explanation given. No forward address. "He's running out of rooms that will have him," Miguel said quietly. And that, the inability to maintain the illusion, was Daniel's real punishment. The family gathered one final time before autumn settled in fully. No lawyers. No agendas. No tension. Claire spoke first. "I want to divorce him," she said plainly. No gasps. No objections. Miguel nodded once. "You have our full support." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. "And I want to say something," she added, turning to me. "Publicly, before anyone else hears a version from him." "Say it," my mother said softly. Claire stood straighter. "I wasn't fooled because I was weak," she said. "I was fooled because I loved. And I'm done paying for that with silence." No one argued. No one corrected her. That was the moment the family truly recalibrated. Not around fear, but around accountability. Later that evening, Mark found me alone on the porch. "You were quiet this week," he said. "I was listening," I replied. "To what?" "To the emptiness," I said. "It tells you more than noise ever does." He looked at me for a long moment. "You changed everything," he said. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I just didn't look away." That distinction mattered. Some weeks later, Daniel sent one final message. No accusations. No threats. Just 4 words. I hope you're happy. I deleted it without reply because happiness was never my goal. Stability was, truth was, peace was, and none of those require permission from someone who tried to steal them. The vacuum Daniel left behind did not collapse inward the way he predicted. It stabilized. Power had reorganized itself quietly, naturally, the way systems do when a disruptive force is removed. Meetings became shorter, decisions clearer. Tension drained from conversations that had once felt like negotiations disguised as family gatherings. For the first time in years, nothing felt performative. And that unnerved people. When chaos becomes familiar, calm can feel suspicious. Claire finalized the divorce within 3 months. Daniel didn't contest it. That surprised everyone, but me. Men like Daniel don't fight battles once the audience has left. Without leverage, without performative power, resistance feels pointless. He signed, disappeared from the process, and left behind a trail of unpaid legal fees his former attorney quietly complained about afterward. The settlement was clean. No property disputes. No drawn-out negotiations. No last-minute threats. Claire walked out of the courthouse lighter than I'd ever seen her. I feel like I've left a burning building, she said in the parking lot, and only now realized I couldn't smell the smoke while I was inside it. That awareness came with grief. Not for Daniel, but for the years she lost to self-doubt. The family adjusted in stages. My mother stopped glancing at her phone anxiously during dinners, as if expecting interruption. My father laughed more easily. Miguel reclaimed a habit he'd abandoned years ago. Early morning walks, alone, without contact lists or contingency plans. Mark slept better. So did I. Because hypervigilance is exhausting, even when it's justified. Daniel became a story told only when necessary. A cautionary reference. A lesson. A name without power. But his shadow lingered longer than his presence. People asked careful questions. How did no one see it sooner? Wasn't there something off about him? Could this happen again? Those questions weren't curiosity. They were fear. And fear doesn't require a villain, just memory. It was Miguel who framed it properly. Daniel wasn't an anomaly, he said one afternoon as we reviewed final audit reports. He was a test. A test of what? Mark asked. Miguel looked at me. Of whether integrity in this family was procedural or cultural. That settled into the room. Because procedures can be exploited. Culture adapts. 6 months after the living room incident, the company instituted a structural shift. Not reactive. Preventative. Rotating oversight. Decentralized checks. Mandatory transparency that didn't rely on trust alone. Some executives resisted at first. This slows things down, they said. Miguel shrugged. So does cleaning up after abuse. The resistance didn't last. People who benefit from clarity rarely argue against it for long. Claire found her voice in unexpected places. She spoke at a small panel about financial autonomy in marriage. Then another. Then a community workshop. Each time, her posture changed slightly, stronger, steadier. It's strange, she admitted to me once. I thought reclaiming my identity would feel louder. And I asked. It feels quieter, she said. But real. Daniel, we heard occasionally, was drifting. Short-term contracts. Remote arrangements. No permanence. Someone mentioned he'd moved cities. Another said he was looking for opportunities abroad. No one followed up. Because people who rely on proximity for power lose relevance quickly when displaced. The family gathered one last time that year. Not because of Daniel, not because of crisis, but because life required nothing more. A birthday, a cake, a quiet room. Late in the evening, as dishes were cleared and conversation softened, my mother looked at me and said something unexpected. You scared me, she said. I paused. Ow! You didn't rush, she explained. You watched. You waited. I wasn't sure whom you were protecting. For a while, it felt like maybe you weren't protecting anyone. I nodded slowly. I was protecting context. Without it, truth feels exaggerated. She considered that. I'm glad you trusted yourself, she said finally. So was I. Weeks later, a mutual acquaintance forwarded me a message. Daniel had asked about me. She's intimidating, he'd said. Too calm. I smiled when I read it. Because calm isn't intimidation, it's clarity. And people who thrive on manipulation find clarity terrifying. The family didn't celebrate his downfall. There were no victory dinners, no triumphant stories, only adjustments. That's how healthy systems respond to threats, to exposure, to loss. They don't gloat, they recalibrate. One night, long after the house settled into sleep, Mark asked me a question I knew had been sitting behind his eyes for months. Did you always know it would work out like this? I shook my head. No. Then how did you stay so steady? I thought about it carefully before answering. Because traps depend on urgency, I said, and I refused to move faster than the truth. He nodded. That saved us. No, I corrected gently. Seeing clearly saved us. I only held the mirror. Sometimes, people ask me whether I feel sorry for Daniel. The answer is simple. I feel nothing. Because pity still centers the manipulator. Indifference removes him entirely. What remains is not revenge, not triumph, just alignment. Family restored to function. Trust rebuilt with structure. Silence without threat. And a single understanding shared by everyone now. The most dangerous traps aren't set to destroy you. They're set to make you doubt yourself long enough to step aside. We didn't. And because of that, everything else endured. Time did what confrontation never could. It placed distance between the damage and the people who lived through it. And in that space, something resilient took shape. Not forgiveness, clarity. The year following Daniel's exposure passed without incident, which in itself felt like an achievement. There were no emergencies masquerading as revelations, no subtle destabilizations dressed as concern. Meetings ended on time. Holidays stayed holiday-sized. Silence was no longer a prelude to chaos. Stability, it turned out, wasn't boring. It was restorative. Miguel stepped back gradually, as he planned years earlier, but never dared while uncertainty lingered. The company transitioned to distributed leadership without fracture, and for the first time, decision-making felt insulated from personality. That insulation mattered, because power that depends on individuals is fragile. Power that depends on systems endures. Claire's life unfolded quietly. She moved apartments. Nothing dramatic, just a place that felt hers. She took a contract role with a nonprofit that worked with women rebuilding financial independence after controlling relationships. It wasn't prestigious. It wasn't lucrative. It was right. Helping them organize accounts feels like helping myself retroactively, she admitted one afternoon over coffee. I watched her talk. Hand steady now, no constant checking of reactions. You didn't lose years, I told her. You gained discernment. She smiled. I wish it hadn't cost so much. Gaining discernment always does, I said. You just paid it forward. Daniel faded further from reach. Once, Miguel received a message from a former colleague asking vaguely whether Daniel had left under difficult circumstances. Miguel responded with a single sentence. Daniel is no longer affiliated with us. That was all. Because legacies are not undone by explanation. They're undone by absence. People sometimes believe that after exposure, after accountability, the story ends with resolution. It doesn't. It ends with vigilance. Because clarity is not a permanent condition, it's a practice. We learned that the hard way. The family instituted annual reviews, with outside eyes and rotating leadership. It wasn't about distrust. It was about humility, a reminder that authority should never be self-certifying. Miguel explained it best during one meeting. No cameras, no pretense. The absence of orchestration was almost audible. My father toasted simply. My mother laughed freely. Claire leaned against the doorway, relaxed in a way she never had when Daniel stood at her side. At some point, conversation drifted back, inevitably, to that night. I still replay it sometimes, my uncle admitted. The moment everything flipped. Me too, my mother said. I think I was waiting for something dramatic to save us. Mark glanced at me. It wasn't dramatic, he said. It was patient. Patience is rarely praised in unravelings, because it doesn't look like courage. It looks like waiting, and waiting unnerves people who expect urgency. Later that evening, Claire approached me with something folded in her hand. I found this, she said. It was a journal page, ripped, yellowing slightly at the edges. Daniel's handwriting. A list of names. Dates. Influence points scribbled in margins like calculations. She watched my face carefully. I didn't know whether to destroy it, she said. Or keep it. What did you choose? I asked. She hesitated. I made a copy. Then I burned the original. I nodded. Good. Why keep a copy? She asked. Because forgetting erases lessons, I said. Forgiving doesn't require amnesia. She folded the paper carefully, slipped it back in her bag, and smiled. I'm glad you were the one who noticed first, she said. I think anyone else would have blown the whole thing up. Explosions hide evidence, I replied. She laughed softly. Of course you'd say that. Months later, a graduate student reached out to me through a professional contact. She was researching informal power consolidation in family-run enterprises, specifically patterns of manipulative influence by non-founding spouses. I was told you might have experience, she wrote delicately. I considered declining. Then I replied, because stories don't vanish when they're ignored. They vanish when they're learned from. The last sign of Daniel came unexpectedly. A mutual acquaintance I ran into at an airport hesitated before speaking. Did you know Daniel asked about you? She said. I waited. He said you scared him, she continued. Not because you were aggressive, but because you were still. I smiled faintly. Stillness disarms those who rely on chaos. It offers no leverage. Not all victories feel like winning. Some feel like safeguarding what never belonged to an aggressor in the first place. Identity, trust, perspective, those cannot be seized, only surrendered. And we hadn't. In the end, the family didn't become flawless. We became functional. And that distinction made all the difference. We learned that traps depend not on cunning, but on compliance. And that once you stop offering yourself as terrain, there's nowhere left for them to spring from. Daniel set his trap, believing exposure would bend us. What it did instead was clarify us. And clarity, unlike control, cannot be taken away. The story did not end with apologies or redemption. It ended the way most real stories do, with continuity. Life resumed, not because something dramatic closed a chapter, but because nothing remained unresolved enough to hold anyone hostage. The absence of conflict stopped feeling temporary and started feeling permanent. That was how we knew Daniel was truly gone. Not physically, not legally, but narratively. He no longer occupied mental space. Conversations stopped backtracking. Decisions were made without accounting for how they might be twisted. That was the Real inheritance, mental freedom. Miguel retired fully that winter. No ceremony, no farewell dinner. Just a quiet transfer of authority he had been preparing for long before Daniel ever entered the family. On his last day, he stood in his office doorway and looked around, not with nostalgia, but with confirmation. This will hold, he said quietly. And it did. The systems endured because they were never about control. They were about resilience. That lesson stayed with all of us. Claire grew into herself without announcing it. Confidence returned not as performance, but as posture. She no longer lowered her voice to preempt disagreement. She didn't over-explain her choices. She trusted the internal signals she once dismissed. One afternoon, she said something that stayed with me. I used to think strength meant holding things together at any cost, she said. Now I know it means knowing when something should not be held at all. That understanding didn't just free her. It reshaped the family. No one ignored discomfort anymore. No one dismissed off feelings as inconvenience. If tension surfaced, it was addressed, not dramatized, not weaponized, just examined. That change alone was worth everything Daniel tried to take. As for me, I returned to my life quietly. Work continued. Relationships deepened. I didn't become a symbol or spokesperson. I didn't need to. I learned something more valuable than recognition. I learned that awareness is not loud. It does not demand acknowledgement. It simply stays awake when others prefer sleep. Months later, during a rare conversation about Daniel, someone asked me a question I hadn't expected. Did you ever feel tempted, they asked, to expose him sooner? I thought about it honestly. Yes, I said, but exposure without structure is just chaos. They nodded slowly. Then how did you know when to act? I answered simply, when his confidence outpaced his caution, because that is always the moment. Manipulators rely on the assumption that others are either afraid, distracted, or desperate. When none of those apply, the illusion collapses on its own. The mansion didn't change. The company didn't fracture. The family didn't splinter. Those were Daniel's miscalculations. He mistook patience for weakness. He mistook silence for ignorance. He mistook proximity for power. And when the truth unveiled itself, not through confrontation, but clarity, there was nothing left for him to grip. There's a certain irony in how traps ultimately work. The person who sets them believes exposure will harm the target. But exposure does not destroy truth. It only removes disguise. What Daniel exposed was himself. What everyone else witnessed was alignment. And alignment is something that cannot be reversed. People still ask me whether the evening in the living room, the cameras, the hanging silence, the collective realization, feels like a defining moment. It does not. The defining moment was everything that followed. The restraint, the documentation, the refusal to rush, the commitment to precision over spectacle. Those things don't make good stories when told quickly, but they build endings that last. I keep one lesson close now, one that I learned without ever seeking. If someone needs secrecy to maintain authority, that authority is already illegitimate. And if someone fears observation more than resistance, they are already exposed. All you have to do is stay still long enough for them to see themselves. Years later, I would struggle to remember Daniel's face, not because time erased him violently, but because memory no longer had a reason to rehearse him. His name carried no heat. His actions required no re-examination. He existed only as a completed equation, solved, filed away, done. That, I learned, is the most complete form of justice. The family never spoke of him to newcomers. There was no cautionary tale offered unless it was earned. No warnings disguised as gossip. If someone asked why certain safeguards existed, why transparency was formalized, why authority rotated rather than consolidated, the answer was always the same. Because clarity matters. No name attached. Claire eventually remarried. Not urgently, not defiantly, but thoughtfully. When she told us, she did not ask for approval. She shared the news the way someone shares weather. No fear of storms, no expectation of collapse. I know who I am now, she said once. So I know who I won't become again. That knowledge was her inheritance. Miguel passed quietly, long after everything had settled. At his memorial, no one spoke about rescue or heroics. They spoke about steadiness, about a man who understood that protection is not control, and that trust is something you reinforce, not test. Afterward, as I stood alone for a moment beneath the open sky, I realized something unexpected. I was no longer proud of how carefully I had moved. I was proud that I no longer needed to. Because true safety doesn't feel like vigilance. It feels like rest. And rest, earned, protected, intentional, is what remained after the trap was revealed, dismantled, and forgotten.